We have a saying in our house, or rather, I have a saying that everybody knows. Whenever anything annoying happens, not that you'd think I'd be one for extremes, but when anything annoying happens, I go, oh, it's all gone wrong. Like, I might have just spilled a bit of pasta or something. It's all gone wrong. Now, sometimes we're prone to doing that just because, like I said, something small. But sometimes we look around our world, our society, our lives, everything, and we go, it's all gone wrong. And we might be a bit extreme, but there's some justification to it, right? We look at society, look at our families maybe, we look at our work situation, we look at our health situation, we look at the future as far as we can see it, and it just feels like it's all gone wrong. What's our hope when life feels like that? And is it different, or should it at least be different if we're Christians than if we're not? Because everybody recognises there's something wrong with the world, right? Well, that's the world we find Noah and his family here in this passage that we had read to us. Everything had gone wrong, right? God has said back in chapter 6, verse 3, that he's going to smash them in 120 years or so, or whatever. They're all going to be dead. Because their inclination of their heart is evil all the time. And the question for us this morning, we're not going to dive down into all the details of what went on, but how did Noah keep going? What's the call for us when it's all gone wrong? What promises can we turn to? How do we keep our hope for the future when it's clear that our society, our world, and our friends is off to hell in a handcart? Well, it's really simple. One sentence this morning. We tell ourselves the Lord will rescue his people and remake his world. Let's just divvy them up and look firstly. We tell ourselves when it's all gone wrong, we tell ourselves afresh, the Lord will rescue his people. Do you ever watch that program on the BBC, Who Do You Think You Are? Is it Who Do You Think You Are or Who Do You Think They Are? Whatever, you all know what I mean. It's that one where they go back and they check out the genealogy and they find out they're related to Vikings or, None of them ever find out that they were just some normal bloke from nowhere, do they? Funny that. Won't make a very good program, was it? But with every single one of them, what you get down to is, in the end, they're not that interested in the events. They want to find out about the people. And Moses, as he writes this for the people who are about to go into the land of Canaan, probably, he gets right at the start of this account, verse 9, this is not about events, first and foremost, it's about people. Look there, verse 9. This is the account of Noah and the flood. That's what we'd write. It's what probably every children's Bible in the world says. No. This is the account of Noah and his family. Moses wants to headline for us right at the beginning of this tale for us. The important thing here is that the family continued. This righteous line of Seth that we saw last week, it was vital for the initial hearers. We'll see exactly why it's so important next week for the initial hearers who were about to invade the land of Canaan. We'll see that in chapter 9 next week. But also, as we saw last week, it's vital because this is the line that leads to Jesus. But here's the thing. It's about this family line being saved. That's what the whole tale's about. That's why Moses puts that headline there. But the family, Noah and his family, do not save themselves. It's the Lord who saves his people and family through Noah. Did you notice that? As the Lord calls Noah to build this ark, And then the water comes and they all get in the ark, and the ark, waves came down and the floods came up, or whatever it is, the rain came down and the floods came up, and the ark on the, whatever it was. Silly song we sang as kids, some of us. It's not Noah who does it, ever. Just check out some of the things. It's the Lord who comes to him, chapter 6, verse 13 and following, and warns him. He says, I'm going to put an end to all the people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, gopher wood. I don't know why. Nobody really knows what wood it is, they're guessing. But ultimately, he said, make it out of this specific wood. He told him it's going to happen. He tells him how to make an ark, verses 14 to 16. Tells him exactly what shape to make it, what size to make it, how to make it. He then, verse 18, makes a covenant with him. Look, a promise to keep his promises, an agreement. He makes a covenant with him that if he goes into the ark, as he's been told, he will save him and his wife and his kids and their wives. He tells him who to take in, doesn't he? Those 7 people we've just talked about. He tells him, chapter 7 and verse 1 and following, when to come in. He says it's going to be in a week now. At verse 4, you're going to come in. And then further on, down there at verse 13, they go into the ark. And the Lord tells them. And did you notice that detail in chapter 7, verse 16? The animals going in were male and female of every living thing, as God has commanded Noah. Then the Lord shut him in. Noah didn't protect himself. Noah didn't seal the ark. How do you seal it with pitch from outside? The Lord did it. And then, as we go on, chapter 8, verse 1, after the waves came down, the floods came up, whatever, the Lord clears the water. And why does he do it? Look there, verse 1 of chapter 8, the Lord remembered Noah. It don't mean he'd forgot him, but he remembered, he brought to mind. He brought to the front of his mind his covenant, his agreement with Noah. And therefore, chapter 8, verse 15 to 17, he told him when to come out, and then he made him promises. But we sing, Brother Noah built an ark. No, the Lord did it. Saying Noah had any hand in saving this is like saying that when I was 6 months old, me and my dad built dormers on the bungalow we lived in at the time. I held a hammer, honest. It was made of plastic, and it was about that big, but I hit a nail. But my dad did it, didn't he? He made it. I just got to stand next to him and take pictures. The Lord saves Noah and his family. What did Noah do? I told you we're going to know why we sung this song. All Noah did was trust and obey. That's all he did. 2 Peter 2 verse 5 tells us that he spent the intervening time while he's building this ark, he spent it preaching righteousness to the people. The righteousness of God, not of himself. That they needed that righteousness and only God could save them. And that they were justly condemned. He preached righteousness, and 6:22, he built the ark. Do you see that repeated refrain? 6:22, chapter 7 verse 5. What did Noah did? Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Chapter 7:5. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. He obeyed God. Why did he obey God? Because obedience comes out of trust. The Lord who made a covenant with him, chapter 6, verse 18. He made promises to Noah, and because Noah believes him, he obeys. Noah believes God will save him through this ark, and so he builds the ark and he gets in it. And Moses is writing this to the initial hearers about to go into the land of Canaan, right? The people of Israel who'd come out, calling them to do the same, to trust God's promises and obey him as they went into the land. He even showing them a flood, right? They'd seen in their own history how God had saved them, brought them safe through the floodwaters, through the Red Sea, as they then swept over and destroyed the Egyptians. Brought them safely through. And now he's promising them, as we'll see next week, he will do the same to the Canaanites as they go into the land following the law of Moses, the lead of Joshua, as they put their hope and trust in God's appointed leader. But all these people failed. We're going to see next week, Noah failed. Massive. The prophets, most of the Old Testament is the prophets telling the people that Joshua and Moses and everybody else in the people of Israel failed. The Lord brought them safe through into the land, into the new world, and they failed. He rescued them and they threw it away. You see, the Holy Spirit wants us to look at this passage and see we need a better Noah, a better Moses, a better Joshua. Pictured in Noah, the one whose righteous life is a warning of our wickedness. The one who really truly is the fulfillment of all God's covenant promises, the ark we can hide in. The one who had come to crush the serpent's head. The one who stands and says, I am the door, the way, the truth, and the life. You can only come in by me, the one in whom we're hidden as the waters of God's wrath go over his head at the cross. The Lord Jesus, the one who is the Lord, our righteousness. You ever seen that film, The Impossible, about the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami in Indonesia or wherever it was, somewhere in the Pacific? And these people get swept away by this massive tsunami. Like Noah, they're probably not going around talking about the different relative floating things of wood. I wonder if that wood over there, that door will float better than that or whatever. They just grab, that floats. Because they're being swept away by a torrent of water. It's not rocket science. Interpreting the Bible, is it? The torrent of God's wrath is coming. All we're called to do is trust and obey. To cling onto. To depend on Jesus. To trust that he has shut us in and brought us close, that he will hold us fast, that he will bring us safely at home. As that hymn paraphrasing Isaiah 43 says, when through the deep waters he calls us to go, the rivers of grief will not the overflow, but he will be with you in trouble to bless and sanctify to thee thy deepest distress. To trust that Jesus will save every single one of his people. He will bring them to himself as the Father draws them by the Spirit's power. And therefore, like Noah, we need to have this confidence the Lord will rescue his people, and therefore to obey his command to make him known, to make disciples. Preaching that righteousness that 2 Peter 2:5 tells us Noah did. Of the ark, the righteousness of the ark the Lord has already given us, Jesus. To tell people that the flood of God's wrath is coming, but there is a way of escape. That there is a holy God, and we have sinned against him and deserve the wrath of God's anger and condemnation in hell. But Jesus has come and lived and died that we might have life. But here's the thing, folks, if we're Christians here this morning. Might have said this once or twice before, but you can't give away what you don't have. We need to look at this story and need to get afresh just how doomed we are in ourselves. Not only we used to be in ourselves, but how doomed any of our efforts are if we try in our own efforts. We need to get afresh just how awesome the way of salvation in Jesus is. It came to my mind, I was thinking about this week. Do you remember them old films, those like 20s films or whatever, where somebody was tied to a train track? You know, there's a train coming. It's like, oh, there's no way out, right? Can you imagine if we had been freed from that train? We're just skipping along on the other side of the fence. Aren't we clever? We've got out. We trusted Jesus. Rather than sitting there urging people to come to the one who can cut the ropes. We should be tied to those tracks, and we should be so grateful to the Lord that he has laid himself down in the path of God's wrath. And the floods of God's condemnation have gone over Jesus' head, that he might rescue his people. So we need to take that confidence. The Lord will rescue his people, but secondly, he will remake his world. Do you remember that Monty Python sketch? The Four Yorkshiremen. Do you remember? Some of you might not remember. There's four old Yorkshire guys in the 70s, and they've made it really good in life, and they're sat around in like Marbella or something talking about how they've made it so good. And all it descends into is an argument about who's had it hardest. You know, we had to live in a hole. Me and Dad would beat us from dawn to dusk. We had to get up 10 minutes after we went to bed. Oh, luxury that. We had to get up 5 minutes before we even were born. And we had to gargle with TCP. Just constantly moaning about how hard life is and what a state the world's in. I don't know any Yorkshireman like that at all. Noah could have spent all his time moaning at the state of the world, couldn't he? Because it were in a right state, right? It were not like the good old days with Methuselah and Enoch and all them. It was a pretty bad state. We saw verses 11 to 13 of chapter 6 tell us that the earth was corrupt in God's sight, full of violence. And he's going to destroy it as the Lord. We saw that last week in verses 5 to 7. Every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. God says it again in chapter 8, verse 21. Noah could have gone, well, I'm the one who found favour in God's sight. I'm the righteous one. What a bunch of losers I'm surrounded by. Instead, what did Noah do? He trusted and obeyed. He got on with building the ark. He got on with building the ark because he believed the Lord's promise that the Lord was going to do something about the state of the world. And the Lord did. Right? He saved his people. He saved all the animals. Why did he bother getting all these animals in? So that chapter 8, verse 15 and following, and fully as we're going to see next week in chapter 9, he could rerun Genesis 1. Do you see that there? Noah came out, these people with all the animals, all the different kinds. We're getting those echoes of chapter 1. God made each animal according to its kind. Lord made... Noah makes an altar. And what does he say to him? Verse 17. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds and the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on earth and be fruitful and increase in number on it. He's going to say the same to Noah and his family in chapter 9. This is the new humanity starting over with the creation mandate. God's starting afresh of it. There's a promise of grace. Look down in verse 21. Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And why? Through sacrifice. Verse 20. Noah built an altar to the Lord, taking some of the clean animals and clean birds. He sacrificed burnt offerings of it. God is bringing his people into this new, fresh, clean land. The initial hearers, as they heard this, couldn't help but think that the Lord was bringing them into the promised land, flowing with milk and honey. And therefore, they could go into this land with confidence, living lives of obedience to the Lord and his covenant. But Noah never quite managed it. As we're going to see next week, his sons stuffed it up. The people of Israel went in and stuffed it up. They were supposed to clean the land as the flood had cleaned the land, and instead they left those in the land they should have expelled. But the Lord's pointing forward here to how he's going to completely, ultimately remake his world through the new and better Noah and Moses and Joshua. This new humanity he's building through the one on whom his favour rests, Jesus. He will remake his world, which itself groans for renewal and remaking, as Romans 8 tells us. And this new and better Noah won't stuff it up. He will bring many sons to glory, moulded into his image. And one day we will finally be like him, because we'll see him as he is. You see, our calling from this passage is the same as Noah's, same as the initial hearers. To live confident lives of trust that the Lord really will provide for all of our needs. That the Lord really will remake this broken world perfect. And therefore, because of that trust, that he is sovereign and good and working out his purposes, we can live lives of obedient joy and love and service and compassionate gospel intentionality. And here's the difference between Noah and Joshua and Moses and the people and us. We have the Spirit of God to enable us. They were like, hey, when you buy a kid's toy, boys, when you buy a toy and it runs out of battery after about 10 minutes, right? Because it's just rubbish batteries. They just didn't have the power to do it. But God has come by his Holy Spirit, and if we trust in Jesus, he's given us his Spirit. It's like plugging us into the mains. We have all the power to say yes to righteousness and no to ungodliness, as we're united to Jesus and empowered by his Spirit. So what's the message of this passage as God remakes this new world and one day will remake it fully? Not quite, don't be a Yorkshireman. But stop trying to save the world. Stop expecting a perfect world. Stop moaning, perhaps, that the world's not perfect. We're not meant to save the world. That's another fella's job. And he's doing quite all right at it, thank you very much. Our job is not to redeem the godless culture around us, but to live in contrast to it. Not withdrawing, but living alongside people so that they can see the distinctive difference that having Christ in us, the hope of glory, brings. This church should give people a taste of what the new humanity of the new heavens and the earth looks like. To give a foretaste of that new world that God's remaking to the world around us. A world where we rejoice in Jesus. Love one another unconditionally. And serve sacrificially because we have all we need in Jesus. Because in that new heavens and earth, we won't have to reach out to people. Because they'll all be saved. The church should be so trusting and so confident that God will rescue his people and remake his world that we live like that. Not panicking that we're going to lose stuff and therefore holding it to ourselves. Not moaning about the state of the world. But just loving and serving and rejoicing in Jesus as we point others to him. So as we preach this gospel that Jesus will rescue his people, as we live in this world looking to the next, the call is to live it out in trust that God will fulfill all his purposes and promises, and obedience to his commands to go and make disciples of all people. What does that look like in every day? It means a lot of things. It literally means almost everything is different. If we have this confidence that God will rescue his people and remake his world. Like literally ask each other this week, what does it mean for you to trust God's promises in this and work it out in obedience? What is going to be different? I'm going to ask as many of you that question as possible I can this week. Please ask each other the question. Chat about them this week. But I've just got 3 to start us off. Here's number 1. If God is going to rescue his people and remake his world, and therefore we trust him and obey him, number 1, pointing a finger firmly at myself, we stop moaning. Because if anybody shouldn't be surprised that the world is going to hell in a handcart, it should be Christians, right? God tells us every inclination of the heart of people is evil. But so often we're the ones who seem so surprised at the evil in the world. We wring our hands and complain about how awful it is. But we fear the consequences, usually for ourselves, not for other people, necessarily. We go all doom and gloom about the future, or we put our hope in other things to sort out the world as it is. Rather than trust the Lord's got it all under control and therefore live lives of transparent hope and joy in him. Looking to the final day when all will be made right. So let me ask you just a couple of questions of us. Would people say, we, you, me, would they say we were hopeful about the future or not? What impression do we give people about whether we're hopeful about the future or not? What would people say captures us or we're passionate about when we look to the future? And what would they say we talk about as the hope for the better future? Not what we think we've said, but what people hear by how passionately we talk about it, by how much we talk about it. Because I know for me, so much of my discussions about the future are either doom-laden or putting hope in other things. Stop moaning, trust Jesus, obey him, rejoice, love, serve that we might reach. Number 2, very briefly on this one, give away, right? If God is going to remake the world, and you and I have everything we ever need in Jesus, we can give away, right? What did Noah take into the ark with him? Did he take in his diamond rings for his missus, and his Lamborghini, and his posh house? No, he built an ark of gopher wood, and he filled it with scratty animals and, animal feed. You think lockdown was hard for us? Think what it was like for them? Because he couldn't take anything with him. God was going to provide for all his needs. 7 animals. Why? Because as we're going to see next week, life got really much better after this. No more veggies, folks. Meat's back on the menu. We don't need to hoard resources or hold tightly onto our money or our time or our energy. We can give away knowing that we will never lack what we need and that the Lord will give us riches beyond measure in the new heavens and the new earth. All the riches of Christ. And then finally, just quickly, because God will rescue his people and remake his world, everything matters. In every single second of life, we are choosing the life of the new humanity and the new heavens and earth in Jesus, or we're choosing the death of the old world in Adam. And the reality of our trust in the Lord, or not, is shown in our willingness to choose obedience, not in the big decisions necessarily, but in every single one of the 10 billion decisions we make every day. Colossians 3:17, 1 Corinthians 10:31, what's the message of those? Whatever you do, whether word or deed, do it all to the glory of God. Just think about those little decisions in your head and in your heart. What about that obedience of God to God when he calls us, 2 Corinthians 10:5, to take every thought captive? To be arguing with ourselves, to look to the reality that God will rescue his people and remake his world because of Jesus, instead of the shadow of the world we see around us, which is passing away. To have that faith in what is unseen rather than dragged away by the shadow of what is seen. Out of that trust in our heart and head comes obedience in actions. What about in our home? As we choose not to go off the handle with our kids or our family or whoever over something that in the view of eternity is less than nothing. But instead choose that spirit of love and service to those around us. We can love as we have been loved because we know the Lord's got this. In our work, do we get dragged into that sense of disaster at stuff going wrong? One comma's in the wrong place. Or somebody's spilt toner all over the photocopier. Or whatever. The figures are down a bit this month. Do we get dragged into that sense of disaster, or can we demonstrate the peace that comes from knowing the Lord is always at work and using this to rescue his people and remake his world, to mold his people like Jesus? Because if we can have that life, that's incredibly attractive to those around us. What about in town? When we make the decision to be in or stay at home, to be out or stay at home, to take the initiative with people or to let life happen, to take the opportunity to speak to somebody of Jesus or stay silent. Is our trust in that reward and acceptance and love of the Lord in eternity enough to drive our obedience to give away, to risk rejection now? And what about in the church? Part of remaking his world is Jesus making his bride spotless. And how does the Lord do that? He does that through his word in his church. So will we choose to be the Lord's instrument as Noah did and move towards people in love and service, or hold that grudge, prioritize that instant gratification, keep ourselves to ourselves? You see, ultimately this tale here is supposed to drive us forward from Noah and his family to Jesus and his family. Just like them, our world is in peril because of the evil of humanity, including ourselves. Just like them, we, his people, are saved through the one on whom the Lord's favour rests. Just like them, we're brought safe home into a new world under God's promise of safety and hope and life. That we might hope for the future. Confident that Jesus really will build his church here and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And out of that confident trust, in that hope that the Spirit gives us to live transformed, radical, obedient lives of joy and peace and risk, giving all the glory to the one who brings us safely home. Jesus has already done the work. He's given us the Spirit to enable us that we might trust him and obey him, that our Father might get the glory and his people might be brought safe home. Let's pray.